Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good to see you again, Matt. It's quite an entourage you brought with you today. A bunch of good people.
Safety in numbers.
I noticed one of them was an attorney, too.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow a little bit in order of where we went through. You say you just acquired 2,000 acres in Jefferson County. This is just curiosities. Don't construe this as an attack on the Game Commission or anything. But what happens when you acquire new land and take it off the tax rolls, because obviously it's now non-taxed? Who makes up that? Is there a program in place that you pay for several years, the taxes to the school district, the county, local governments that this land sits in?
No, actually, the Game Commission, as well as the Department of State Forest, DCNR, we pay in lieu of taxes. So the Game Commission actually pays $1.20 on each acre of state game lands that we own. That goes to the school district, the township, and the county for every acre that we own in the state, and we do that annually. In addition to that, there is twice that amount, which comes from the Gaming Commission, which also goes to the school district, the township, and the county.
Is that in perpetuity?
Yes.
I wonder, just curiosity, and I certainly wouldn't know what the taxes are in Jefferson County, but I wonder how that compares to what it was before you owned it to now that you do own it.
Well, in many cases, and I can't speak for every case, but in many cases, those properties are enrolled in programs like Clean and Green, and so the payment in lieu of taxes is actually much higher than it is if they were just on the tax rolls. So
these local government entities, taxing entities, would have actually received an increase because you took over the land.
Correct.
Okay, fair enough. You own currently, the Game Commission currently owns 1.5 million acres. And obviously you're acquiring more as we go along. Is there a set goal of acres in a set period of time, or do we just buy land, say that land looks good, let's go get it? Yeah. How do you determine how much land to buy and where?
Well, I think, one thing that we have learned through our human dimension studies is that hunters don't want to travel more than 30 minutes from where they live. Of course, our major metropolitan areas, we have a lot of hunters, and they don't want to travel that far. So we are trying to acquire additional acreage like in the southwest region and the southeast region. Unfortunately, the cost of land in both of those regions is extremely high, sometimes puts it out of our price range, and a lot of times there's not land available there. But we also look for large, unbroken tracts of land. They just don't exist that much in the Commonwealth anymore, and those are of a very high value for wildlife. So we're very interested in any of those large tracts. I'm talking 4,000 or 5,000 acre tracts that still exist.
Given the fact that you have to pay this fee in perpetuity on this land, each time you purchase new tracts of land, small or large, your annual costs now increase to operate.
Correct. Ours is about, this past year was about $1.8 million for the payment in lieu of taxes.
And from what I'm gathering from your testimony, unless some kind of new revenue stream evolves, purchasing more land might be out of the question because of the additional costs going forward.
It has been probably for about the last year, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we did do some purchases that we have had in the works for the past 3 or 4 years where we were pretty much committed to the seller to purchase that. But other than that, we put most of those purchases on hold at this time.
Okay. Changing gears just slightly. You came down along with a veterinarian, I think he was a veterinarian, to my office to meet with one of my taxidermists/butchers earlier this year to talk about the CWD program, and I think we decided at that point we were going to develop new regs for when deer come into Pennsylvania, when harvested deer are brought back to Pennsylvania, and new regs on certifying butcher shops to process the deer and how the remains are disposed of. Where are we in that process now of getting those regs developed? Because one of the things that that we wanted to make sure of is that we had, I think we all agreed, whatever regs come out to certify these shops, you want to do it as soon as possible so that everybody has a chance before this next
Correct.
Deer season. So where do we stand with that?
Wayne LaRoche is the director of the Bureau of Wildlife Management, and Wayne's seated back here, and he was the individual that was in your office. Okay. He thinks he's a veterinarian, but he's not. But,
I do recognize him. I just couldn't remember his title.
Yeah. But Wayne has been working diligently on chronic wasting disease, and we actually have a meeting set up with the Department of Agriculture, who has the authority to manage our captive cervid farmers, the 1,200 of those that exist in Pennsylvania. So we are meeting with them, it's in March, I can't remember the date, to try to see how we can work together to put additional regulations in place to try to make sure this disease doesn't progress any further.
Right, well, we talked about, and I think this is really, really important because burning these deer in an incinerator doesn't kill the disease. We know that, and then those ashes could be spread on our landscape, so that would be just multiplying the disease. We know that we need to have them buried in a landfill, literally buried, which is where we went with that conversation. But if we don't get our processors out there somewhat certified that they know this is how, and they agree to use this method, then we're hurting ourselves. But I guess the point I'm making is that it'd be really important, at least to me and probably most people on this committee, to know that by midsummer there's something going to be put in place so that anybody that wants to process deer in Pennsylvania, they have taken a test or proven that they have the knowledge of how to dispose of these deer properly. And I just can't reiterate that thought enough.
And that's a very good thought and very important thought, and I'm sure that Wayne will be working on that, and we will have something at least in place for those processors that are receiving deer from other states that are coming in, like from the state of Maryland or West Virginia, in plenty of time.
Okay. As far as the fee increases, yesterday we heard from the Fish and Boat, and they told us about a Senate bill that's out there that would allow the Fish and Boat Commission to regulate their own fee structure.
Correct.
I'm going to make an assumption that if you're not already included in that bill, that you wouldn't mind being included in that bill.
Well, we wouldn't mind being included in the bill, but it's dealing with two different acts, two different laws. So we would have to have a separate bill.
Or a similar bill.
Right. Senator Stefano is in the process of trying to introduce a similar bill for the Game Commission.
Okay. If by chance today that bill had been signed into law and today it was enacted, what percentage increase do you guess that yourself and the gentleman sitting behind you would agree that we needed to raise the rates on these fees? Is it 10%, 5%, 20%? What kind of a fee increase are you looking at?
Well, actually, there is a bill that has not been introduced yet, but we actually have worked with the Senate to come up with some fees, and basically, here's what we had proposed. Would be an adult resident license would go from $19 to $29.
That's a 30% jump.
At least, correct. And if you look back to the last time we had an increase, it was about a 50% jump. And at that time, we only lost about 3% of our licensed buyers, and we found that within 2 years, they came back. So unlike the Fish Commission that says they lose 8 to 10% with the fishing license increase, we only found historically that we lost about 3%.
If the Game Commission had the ability to police themselves, would you want to take such a big jump all at one time or ease it up a couple % every other year?
Well, initially, we need that bump because we haven't had an increase since 1999. So that's what we would be looking at. If it was up to us, we would pretty much be going with what is in that bill to increase for that initial bump. And then after that, we would look from a year-to-year basis. I think one thing that the current system does is it's so difficult for us to predict what kind of revenues we're going to get because, we've been trying to get a license increase basically since 2005. So if we have to go about getting it every 10 to 15 years, we're going to make the jump that thinks this has to last us for the next 10 to 15 years.
Well, the way I phrased the question is if you had a bill like this where you could police it yourself, you wouldn't have to ask us.
Correct. But in this case, we haven't had one since 1999, so we need that big jump.
Okay.
After that, in the future, I would see us much smaller increases in increments. There may be times when we would not even think we need a license increase. If you have, for example, the Marcellus Shale revenue that we obtained or the Pittman-Robertson funding that increased, we didn't need a license increase. But now that those things are starting to dwindle, we're in serious jeopardy. There would be times, if we knew we could control it, we wouldn't have to be worried as much about the future as we currently do now.
Okay, I'm going to let you off the hook here in just a couple seconds.
Yeah.
I assume that we haven't changed anything. An out-of-state license is an out-of-state license, and this is the fee, and no matter where you're from, correct?
Correct.
What's your thoughts on a bill that would create a reciprocating license fee for out-of-state licenses to match whatever they would charge us to do the same thing in their state? I'm about to go turkey hunting in Missouri, and that little license is going to cost me $225. So I would be okay and probably willing to write it. I don't know how it would go, but whatever another state would charge us to hunt in their state, that would be the fee here. I did that on a fishing trip out to Michigan not long ago, and they literally pulled out a piece of paper and looked up what Pennsylvania's out-of-state fishing license would be, and that was my fee for their out-of-state license, so it changed state by state. Would you be all right with that? I'd
have to look at that to see exactly what it is. I would think that knowing from what I do know now, our out-of-state license fees are much less than neighboring states. And if we reduced it, how many of those non-residents would continue to come to Pennsylvania? We don't want to price them out of the market either. And the other part of that is that we have a lot of individuals that were always Pennsylvania residents, reach retirement age, and then they move to Florida, for example. And they only come back to hunt 2 or 3 days a year. They come back to their hunting camp, and we don't want to lose those individuals either. So the proposal that we were looking at actually would not raise fees for junior hunters, senior hunters, either residents or non-residents. It would just be the adult hunters that had to put up with that additional tariff.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to make one quick statement, and then I am done. I look at Sunday hunting as a personal property rights issue on personal private property. I think that in this day and age, it's wrong for us to tell someone that we can't do a legal activity on our own land no matter what day of the week it is. That's just my personal thoughts. But thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.